feel powerless. We can and will stop this evil contagion. In that task, we must honor the sacred memory of those we have lost by acting as one people. Open wounds cannot heal if we are divided. We must seek real bipartisan solutions. We have to do that in a bipartisan manner that will truly make America safer and better for all. First, we must do a better job of identifying and acting on early warning signs. I am directing the Department of Justice to work in partnership with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as social media companies, to develop tools that can detect mass shooters before they strike. As an example, the monster in the Parkland High School in Florida had many red flags against him, and yet nobody took decisive action. Nobody did anything. Why not? Second, we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately. Cultural change is hard, but each of us can choose to build a culture that celebrates the inherent worth and dignity of every human life. That's what we have to do. Third, we must reform our mental health laws to better identify mentally disturbed individuals who may commit acts of violence and make sure those people not only get treatment, but when necessary, involuntary confinement. Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun. Fourth, we must make sure that those judged to pose a grave risk to public safety do not have access to firearms, and that if they do, those firearms can be taken through rapid due process. That is why I have called for red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders. Today, I'm also directing the Department of Justice to propose legislation ensuring that those who commit hate crimes and mass murders face the death penalty, and that this capital punishment be delivered quickly, decisively, and without years of needless delay. These are just a few of the areas of cooperation that we can pursue. I am open and ready to listen and discuss all ideas that will actually work and make a very big difference. Republicans and Democrats have proven that we can join together in a bipartisan fashion to address this plague. Last year, we enacted the Stop School Violence and Fix NICS Acts into law, providing grants to improve school safety and strengthening critical background checks for firearm purchases. At my direction, the Department of Justice banned bump stocks. Last year, we prosecuted a record number of firearms offenses. But there is so much more that we have to do. Now is the time to set destructive partisanship aside, so destructive, and find the courage to answer hatred with unity, devotion, and love. Our future is in our control. America will rise to the challenge. We will always have, and we always will, win. The choice is ours, and ours alone. It is not up to mentally ill monsters. It is up to us. If we are able to pass great legislation after all of these years, we will ensure that those who were attacked will not have died in vain. May God bless the memory of those who perished in Toledo. May God protect them. May God protect all of those from Texas to Ohio. May God bless the victims and their families. May God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
See if he takes any questions there. Clearly not there from the White House. In a forceful speech, you heard the president expressing disdain for the evil attacks that have left America sickened and outraged. At one point, in one voice, saying that our nation must condemn racism and white supremacy. Few things now. He's directing DOJ to work with social media companies to identify killers before they strike. Second, stop the gruesome and grisly video games, a culture, he says, that celebrates violence. Third, we must reform mental health laws to identify those who may commit acts of violence before it happens. And these red flag laws that he referred to, proposing legislation that will enforce capital punishment. Stay tuned to this Fox station and the Fox News Channel for continuing coverage on this story from El Paso and Dayton, Ohio, and New York City. Until then, I'm Bill Hemmer in New York. Have a good day. And when there are developments on these stories, we will bring them to you. Until then, so long for now. As we say so long to our viewers watching across the country on the Fox stations, we continue our coverage here in America's Newsroom on cable. And with that, here's my colleague, Sam.
We vow to act with urgent resolve, said the president. Federal authorities will provide whatever assistance is required. And following up on speaking with the Dayton mayor earlier, the president saying, I am open to discussing all ideas that will work. Let's bring in Texas Congressman Michael Burgess. He represents the 26th district in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where FBI agents have searched 3 homes where the El Paso suspect had previously stayed. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. You were listening to the president. What did you take away from his message just there?
Well, first off, can I just say that just as every Texan this morning, our hearts are heavy for the loss of our fellow Texans, and clearly we stand in solidarity with those who lost their family members and loved ones in Ohio. The president came out with a forceful statement, obviously a statement of conciliation, which the nation needed to hear, but also a forceful statement about the path going forward. I, for one, am gladdened to hear his Department of Justice is willing to step up. And, you know, the cautionary notes that we've all seen that surround when the information is revealed around these shootings, that there were a number of things that were blinking red, and no one did anything. So I think I heard Congressman Will Hurd this morning say on another channel that if you see something that is posted online, take a screenshot, get it to someone. He recommended the FBI. I'll go a little further and say your local police or your local sheriff's office certainly should be aware of that screenshot that you've saved. But look, there's no single thing that is going to be a panacea. I like the concept of this temporary gun violence protective order that the president has discussed. If there are red flags there, give law enforcement the tools that they need to do something until the issue is settled, provide all due process protections for law-abiding citizens. But this is one of the things that I think could go a long way towards alleviating this problem. You heard so many things from the president just there, Congressman. We condemn white supremacy. He talked about reforming mental health laws in this country. He called for the red flag laws that he has called for, the death penalty for mass murders and mass shootings. What did you hear from the president in the wake of so many calls, particularly from Democrats running for the presidency? What did you hear from the president as far as a willingness to change or adapt gun laws in this country, in his words just now? Well, I think you heard that he was open to suggestion. Let me share with you the reality in which I live every day in the United States House of Representatives. There are people in the House of Representatives who do not want to give the administration a single win on anything, whether that be drug prices, whether that be cost of health care. They do not want to see the president win on anything because they are positioning themselves for 2020. That's perhaps part of the tragedy in this situation.
Sir, can you shed any more light on the investigation down there in Texas? It's our understanding this individual is from Dallas and he drove to El Paso. Do we know when and why that happened? No, I certainly can't provide you anything than what's been available on national and local news media. Obviously, they have contacted the individual's family, I believe his grandparents. They've said they're only talking to law enforcement, not to news media. I think that's a responsible position for them to take.
And of course, when you had these two episodes occur back to back, extremely important to know, well, wait a minute, is there something else waiting in the wings? Is there another shoe yet to drop on this? Apparently not. They do appear to be completely unrelated. And as far as the individual who left the North Texas area to go to El Paso, it seems like that was the action of a single individual and not a larger block. But and the president also mentioned the death penalty. Obviously, the death penalty is alive and well in Texas, and this individual, as I understand it, is being held without bond in the jail in El Paso, and he is being charged with a capital crime, which would be accessible to the death penalty. Clearly, there are federal death penalty provisions as well. So I guess the question is, where is that going to take place? Is it Huntsville, Texas, or Leavenworth, Kansas? I don't care. Like the president, I want it to be fast.
Last point here. Democrats are calling for senators to come back to Washington and end the August break. I know you're on the House side, but is that something that would lead to anything productive?
Hard to know because, again, reference my earlier remarks about no one on the Democratic side wanted to give the president a win. Surely it's useful when the world's greatest deliberative body gets together and deliberates. If it is a requirement that the House come back, I'm absolutely okay with that. I think we should be willing to reschedule anything we have on the August recess. This is important work that needs to be done, but realistically, that's a decision that would be up to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, not one that I can make.
Congressman Michael Burgess, we appreciate your time this morning, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. To John Roberts we go now, who was inside the room, and he's now on the North Lawn. John, good morning there.
Good morning to you, Bill. And as you saw, the president did not take any questions, even though we tried on the way out. It was unusual that the president had mentioned in a tweet this morning that Congress needs to come together to act, maybe to pass new laws regarding background checks. There was nothing about that in the president's speech. We asked the president on the way out if he is asking for the Senate to reconvene to pass the House bill regarding closing certain loopholes in background checks. The president wouldn't take any questions. It was significant, though, that we saw the president come out and strongly condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. His daughter, Ivanka, had a tweet out yesterday in which she strongly condemned white supremacy, saying that hate in all forms has to be stopped. We were wondering if the president was going to echo those sentiments today, and indeed he did. You heard your previous guest talk about the need to reform mental health laws as well as come together in a bipartisan fashion to do something about this. The question has long been, what do you do about it? I mean, people on one side of the aisle are calling for a ban on assault-style rifles. People on the other side are saying we have to enforce these mental health rules and laws, and we have to reform them so that people who would demonstrate that they may be a threat to society can actually be monitored. The president would like to see that happen. He also talked about the dark areas of the internet and how it is a place where people who may feel ostracized or somehow shut out of society in other ways get radicalized. The president pointed to the manifesto that the El Paso killer had and how he was influenced and was roaming around in the dark web of the internet. The president wants to get together with internet and social media companies in order to better monitor these people. So on the one side, you're going to hear this between now and the time that Congress comes back, unless they come back sooner, is do you solve this problem with tightening up gun laws, or do you solve this problem by trying to identify people who are a threat to society? That has long been the debate, and that's probably the debate that will continue. But the president today, in a very strong bipartisan call for members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to come together and do something about this. But again, there will be an argument on what to do.
He mentioned the FBI director and the AG Bill Barr and a few members of Congress, too. Who do you think has his ear on this issue, John?
I think that Bill Barr probably has his ear to a greater degree than Chris Wray does. I mean, Wray testified back in April to Congress. He also recently testified about the threat that is coming from white nationalism, white extremism. Over the past 18 months, 7 mass shootings have been perpetrated by white extremists. And Christopher Wray testified on Congress that it is definitely a problem. It is pervasive. It's something that the FBI is tracking down, though it wasn't specifically singled out in a budget request to try to tackle domestic terrorism that the FBI has submitted to Congress. So they're looking at it. We don't know to what degree they are putting a focus on it, but there are a lot of people out there who will tell you, Bill, that white nationalism, white extremism is a growing threat to this country, and it is perhaps an underreported threat to this country, but one that certainly now is being paid a lot more attention to in the wake of what happened in El Paso. What happened in Dayton appears to have a different route in terms of its genesis. There are some reports that this individual long had a troubled history, that there were a lot of red flags about this person that people paid attention to, but were never acted on. So that is going to infuse itself in the debate as well. You know, I think that people will tell you that there is no one answer to this. It will take a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. I think the president recognizes that, but he does want to get something done, and he wants to get it done quickly.
That phrase, cultural change, is hard.
It is.
And it can be. John, thank you for
John,
the
thanks.
White House.
Well, we just heard from the president. He addressed the nation moments ago on the mass shootings in Texas and Ohio over the weekend. Our A-team is here. They will join us next.
We ask God in heaven to ease the anguish of those who suffer, and we vow to act with urgent resolve.
So we are watching this in addition to the reaction from the White House now, and we are down about 2%, which is, for any observer of the stock market, significant. Off 500 points now in an hour and 3 minutes. Below 26,000 for the Dow 30. There was a lot of action over the weekend with regard to the trade fight and the tariff battle with China. On Thursday, the president said he will go forward on the 1st of September, exacting 10% a tariff charge in addition to what has already been slapped on Chinese goods. So Beijing turned around over the weekend and they lowered the currency, and they told some of their state-owned agencies not to sell farm products to the United States. So if you thought we were trying to climb our way out of this, it appears, at least based on the headlines, that we are far from it. Stuck between Washington and Beijing, and this is a result of that. So we'll see where it goes. Sometimes these things have a way of flipping in the afternoon. I don't know if today is that day or not.
528-point sell-off catches your eye, a full 2% sell-off there. And you've got major analysts on Wall Street who, Peter Boockvar, saying that this is a trade dispute, a trade situation has gone off the rails at this point. A lot of them, and I reference Wall Street analysts, are criticizing the use of tariffs as a tool to take issue with China. So all of that uncertainty is getting baked into the stock market now, with the Dow off 530 points.
In the meantime, here was the president a moment ago at the White House.
The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul.
That was President Trump just a few moments ago saying the nation must condemn white nationalism. Let's bring our A-team in now. Marianne Marsh, former senior advisor to John Kerry, Howard Kurtz, Fox News media analyst and host of Media Buzz, and David Avella, chairman of GOPAC. Good morning to all of you. Howie, let's start with you first. You're on the air over the weekend when all of this was happening. Your thoughts as we have now heard from the president this morning?
Well, a moving speech by the president. I was glad he called out some of these dark social media sites where these mass murderers hang out, and he unambiguously condemned white supremacy, that in part a response to critics who've accused him of somehow encouraging white supremacy. But there was a glaring omission, Sandra, and it was the expectation had been raised by the president himself in tweets this morning where he talked about the need for tighter background checks for gun purchases, and there was nothing about that, just a sort of a generalized call for a bipartisan solution. The president has a unique opportunity here. You'll recall early in his term, he brought in members of Congress for televised sessions, both parties, and even taunted some Republicans for being afraid of the NRA. He said he would take the heat, but then after meeting with the NRA, he decided to drop any effort for background checks, though he did follow through on the bump stocks prohibition. And so the question is, Congress has been so gridlocked on this issue, yet the nation's shocked and horrified by these twin mass killings. Could President Trump actually lead? It's not a panacea by any means, but could he lead on modest gun control, or as happened after Parkland High School, as happened after Las Vegas and some of these other tragedies, will it dominate the news for a few days and then simply retreat?
And David, we spoke to the mayor of Dayton, Ohio earlier on this program, and she said she felt when she spoke to the president that he is open to change. And what he said when he was speaking from the White House just a few moments ago, I am open to discussing all ideas that work. So why did he not get then more specific, especially when it does come to background checks, if that is something he ultimately will propose?
Sandra, the president was specific. And you think about the tone, it was very much reminiscent of President George W. Bush's tone after the 9/11 attacks, and the need that federal, state, and local law enforcement all need to be working together. The silos that keep government agencies from working together need to be taken down, that we need to go after these hatred ideologies. He talked some about mental illness. It would have been good had he talked about the need to get more men and women into the healthcare field, mental illness healthcare field, to put more money into mental health facilities. Though he set the right tone, because for the president today, he talked about taking on violence, not just gun violence. And these horrific acts this weekend were all done through firearms, but killers look for any way they can to take people out. And what the president talked about was a holistic approach to taking on violence in the U.S.
I think the phrase that sticks out, racist hate, Marianne, bigotry, and white supremacy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, actions speak louder than words, though, Bill. And the fact is, Donald Trump was right to condemn all of those things. Unfortunately, everything he condemned, and that was in that manifesto, you could hear at a Trump rally or read on his Twitter feed. What he did not do today is call on Mitch McConnell to bring the Senate back to pass 2 bills that passed the House with Republican votes that would close all these background checks. He didn't call to end assault weapons, which is what the mayor of Dayton asked him to do. When Bill Clinton banned the sale of assault weapons, mass shootings went down by 43%. When George W. Bush and Republicans allowed that ban to expire, mass shootings went up 230%. Last point here. He points to video games and mental illness. The fact is, every country in the world has video games and people with mental illness. Yet no country kills its own citizens with guns more than the United States. The fact is, more people have been killed in the United States by guns since 1968 than every single American that's been lost in a war combined since the Revolutionary War to this day in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's why we have a gun problem, and that's the problem that should be solved and not linked to immigration, because it has nothing to do.
Howie, what is striking is the amount of politics that have already been thrown out here. I mean, it continues to be a substantial pile-on. Cory Booker a moment ago, the president's weak and wrong. White supremacy, he writes, is not a mental illness, and guns are a tool that white supremacists use to fulfill their hate. I know this came up in your program over the weekend. What do you think about that finger of blame that we're seeing already?
It's a pattern after every mass shooting, and it just tears my heart out, because the people who are to blame ultimately are those who are pulling the trigger, the twisted monsters, as the president called them. Now, I want to be really clear on this, because I'm taking some heat, and that is, the president uses divisive rhetoric. Sometimes he's used incendiary rhetoric. In fact, the Fox News poll had nearly 2/3 saying he had crossed the line with his tweets against the freshman and congresswoman of color. That is absolutely fair game for an important debate. But it is very different to slide into guilt by association, say, as Beto O'Rourke did on CNN, that the president condones this kind of violence, that he encourages.
Called him a white nationalist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said this when Barack Obama was president and some police officers were killed, and there were some conservative voices who said he had blood on his hands. Now, you can absolutely criticize rhetoric as setting the wrong tone, perhaps contributing to the wrong climate, but it is very different to blame politicians for the actions of evil, twisted people. And I think we in the media, and I think people in politics, even those running for his job, need to be a little more careful in their inflammatory.
Lastly, David, you heard the president, as he has called for the red flag laws. He said, quote, "We need to act on identifying early warning signs." What does the president do next, as we are still just hours out from both of these tragedies this weekend?
Sure. Let's keep in mind, talking about this gun control, it has had bipartisan opposition, is why it doesn't get through Congress. It's not just Republicans, there are Democrats. Hence why when President Obama had the House and the Senate, he couldn't pass gun control measures. To your question specifically, the president has to start seeing where the courts are going to allow the use of artificial intelligence and image watching and all the things you see big data companies gathering. Are the courts going to allow that type of information to be used by law enforcement to get out ahead of violence that could occur based on trends and stats that are coming up suggesting that violence could be happening? Are the courts going to allow that type of surveillance of Americans to give law enforcement another tool to try to prevent tragedies like that?
We have to squeeze in a commercial break here. To all three of you, thank you, David and Marianne and Howie. Thank you for your thoughts now.
The president declaring hate has no place in our country as Democrats demand Congress come back into session to take action now. Karl Rove will join us live from Texas next hour. Just over an hour into trading, the Dow is off 605 points now, sinking to its lows of the session as we speak, after Beijing ramps up its response now to the president on a new round of tariffs. China's currency falling to its lowest level, I should just say, against the dollar in more than a decade. Here now is Charles Payne, host of Making Money on the Fox Business Network. The president talking about that currency manipulation, as he is calling it. Right. Beijing, I know, is denying that. But what is happening here? Why are we seeing this sell-off, Charles?
Well, this takes us to another realm of the currency war, and it's just, there's a couple things. There's the factual parts of it. Certainly it hurts the companies, American companies that sell into China, because the dollar is so much stronger than the Chinese currency. It means American products are so much more expensive. They're sure to lose sales, they're sure to lose market share. And that's why it's interesting when people say, well, don't worry about tariffs, it just falls on the consumer. That's not necessarily the case. This red on the screen represents more corporate profits taking hit, the big multinationals. Also the uncertainty factor, because now what does President Trump do? It makes it a lot harder, of course, to come to a resolution. The tit for tat going deeper.
But the White House pushed back on that over the weekend. Peter Navarro, who's in on all these trade deal negotiations, was talking to Chris Wallace and says the consumer is not feeling the pain of this war.
They're not. I agree with Peter. He was on my show Friday, and I agree with him. In fact, I think the irony is that on Friday we got a report on manufacturing prices. They're in a deflationary death spiral. Now, the tariffs that have been on for a year have hit manufacturing products. Remember, when the tariffs first went on, we were told prices were going to go up. So how do you explain manufacturing product prices? And I'm talking a deflationary death spiral right now. So, and let me tell you, even before this currency devaluation, there was only going to be a limited impact to the American consumer for a variety of reasons. But here's the thing. When do we resolve it, and how much further does it go? I think with most of this, what we're seeing in terms of the sell-off is more anxiety-driven than anything else.
So Charles, as he's known to do, Sandra, handed me the sheet of paper as he walked in the studio. And the sell-off in May of this year, where's the market a week later? It was sell-off was 2%. It was up half a point a week later. February of 2016, it was off 3%. It was back up 2% a week later.
Right.
What is it, August 2015, down 5.5%. It was back 5.5%.
So what conclusion are you drawing from that data?
The data is saying that there's this is an emotionally driven sell-off right now.
All right, so you're saying buy this sell-off.
You don't have to necessarily buy it, but I am saying be careful not to sell a great stock.
Got it.
Okay, at the very least. I'm going to be looking for opportunities. I don't have to buy today, but I would suspect that President Trump and or the Federal Reserve will hear from them very soon.
Could this escalate to 25% tariffs? And Morgan Stanley saying plan on a global recession if that were to actually happen over a period of time.
It could. I mean, we'll see. You know, a lot of people are hoping that maybe the back channels are being used right now. Also, what's the next move by the Federal Reserve? I think Jay Powell got real political last week, and he made a huge mistake by bringing up the trade war so often in that Q&A session. He made a huge mistake. He gave China an opening.
Very interesting. Charles Payne, we will be watching you at 2 o'clock for sure, see where this market goes.
In the meantime, we expect this update from Dayton, Ohio in a matter of moments. Police will hold a news conference at the top of the hour. We will bring that to you live. And then new reports of the gunman's troubling past going back to high school. So we are watching that out of Dayton, Sandra.
Plus more aggression from Iran after it seizes another oil tanker in the Persian Gulf. We're going to have more reaction from Tehran and the Pentagon coming up. Fuel to Arab countries. 7 sailors on board have been detained. This, of course, with tensions high between the U.S. and Tehran after Washington reimposed sanctions on Iran. Lucas Tomlinson has more from the Pentagon this morning. Lucas?
Sandra, it's the 3rd oil tanker seized by Iranian forces since mid-July. It was seized on the same day the Trump administration sanctioned Iran's top diplomat. Javad Zarif says he was sanctioned after declining an invitation to visit the White House.
The United States is not interested in diplomacy, period. Had they been interested in diplomacy, they would not have left the diplomatic table for negotiations, which existed, was at their disposal. They just left it.
The Iraqi oil tanker was seized near Farsi Island near the Persian Gulf, 400 miles from the Strait of Hormuz, where Iranian forces seized those 2 other oil tankers last month, one from Great Britain, the other from the United Arab Emirates. Farsi Island is also where Iranian forces briefly detained those 10 U.S. Navy sailors in 2016. Iran's provocations come more than a year after the Trump administration pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal and ramped up sanctions against Iran, crippling its oil exports. Sunday, Iraq's oil ministry denied any ties to the oil tanker seized by Iran. On the alleged offer by the Trump administration to meet Zarif, on Sunday, Iranian state media said, quote, during a meeting with the U.S. Senator, they invited him to meet Trump. The New Yorker says, Sandra, Senator Rand Paul made the offer. Sandra.
All right, Lucas Tomlinson at the Pentagon. Lucas, thank you.
Lucas, thank you. Fox News alert right now, awaiting a news conference. Dayton, Ohio, a gunman killed 9, including his own sister, in a mass shooting over the...
With fellow Americans calling on Congress to act after back-to-back mass shootings in Texas and Ohio over the weekend, killing 29 people. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith.
I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning. Sandra, good morning to you. A news conference set to start any moment now. Dayton, Ohio, a gunman there Saturday night, Sunday morning. Outside of a bar, killed 9 people. That included his own sister, who rode with him to the bar in the same car moments earlier. Before police responded, in less than a minute time, they shot him dead in the street, no doubt saving countless lives. 13 hours earlier, Saturday morning, a gunman attacking shoppers at a Walmart in El Paso, killing 20 in the aisles of that store. 2 senseless tragedies, leaving one troubling question: why? President Trump addressed the nation this way 1 hour ago.
We must seek real bipartisan solutions. We must do a better job of identifying and acting on early warning signs. I am directing the Department of Justice to work in partnership with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as social media companies, to develop tools that can detect mass shooters before they strike.
Mike Tobin is standing by with the latest from Dayton this morning, where we await officials in that news conference. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra. In the meantime, you can see that life is returning to normal here in this hub of restaurants in Dayton. The cars are driving past the row of cameras, past, sadly, another row of flowers and candles. All the people can do here to memorialize the 9 lives that ended so suddenly and senselessly on Saturday night, Sunday morning. Meantime, police have released video that shows the panicked people running from the gunfire up 5th Street here. Ultimately, you'll see police officers enter the frame, weapons drawn, and they gun down this gunman clad in body armor with a mask and hearing protection as he attempts to enter the crowded Ned Pepper's bar. Police say the massacre would have been much worse had he been allowed to enter. And despite reports that say the gunman had been suspended from high school because he'd compiled a hit list of classmates and a list of girls that he wanted to rape, the police chief says there is nothing that prevented him from legally purchasing the AR-15 and 100-round magazines used in this massacre. Access to weapons is a point that Dayton's mayor took up in a phone call with President Trump.
Well, I talked to the president yesterday. He called to offer his condolences to the people of Dayton, and I appreciate that. And we did have a discussion around why this kind of gun even exists in our communities. This person, the shooter, bought this gun legally and did so much damage in the course of 30 seconds.
Ohio Congressman and presidential hopeful Tim Ryan wants Congress to come back from break, pass emergency legislation toughening background checks and banning assault weapons.
This is bull. The American people are fed up with what's happening in the political process today when people get slaughtered on their own streets and absolutely nothing happens.
And Ryan says with the National Rifle Association in turmoil and public sentiment high, now is the time to act. Sandra?
Mike, the mayor was on with us earlier as you just played a little bit of sound from that interview. She said her community is resilient and gritty. As you mentioned, folks are getting back up this morning, getting back to work. What are you seeing as far as a sense of community there and a community that so desperately will have to heal and come together in the wake of this horrific event over the weekend?
Well, you know, frequently now you're hearing the term Dayton strong as people attempt to rebound. You see a lot of people hugging. You saw last night a big show of unity on the very same cobblestones where the blood was shed. And right now, frankly, I think people want to come together. They want to have that sense of unity. They want to have that sense of community. But there's also a sense of helplessness. As the mayor mentioned, this has happened now some 250 times, and people are wondering what they can do to make it not happen again other than come together. Sandra?
Mike Tobin on the ground in Dayton. We await that news conference. We'll bring that to you live when it begins. Mike, thanks. President Trump offering prayers and condolences to the families of victims in Texas and Ohio, saying hate has no place in our country. For more, let's bring in Karl Rove, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush and Fox News contributor. Karl, good morning to you.
Morning.
First, if you could respond to the words from the president just a few moments ago.
Well, I thought they were good. This is a moment where the country needs to be brought together and where we need to have a sense of common purpose, common goal. And it's tough in these times. Everybody in our political system needs to do better. The president needs to do better. His rhetoric at times has been raw and dangerous, I think, in terms of being easily misunderstood. You know, the Charlottesville statement, for example. But he's not the only one who is not rising up to the level that America needs. I looked at the comments of the Democratic candidates for president, and look, I get it. They're running for president. This happens in the middle of the campaign. But the readiness to blame this on the president, it strikes me as way over the top. For example, Cory Booker, there's complicity in the president's hatred that undermines the goodness and decency of Americans. Mayor Buttigieg, at best, President Trump is condoning and encouraging white nationalism. Kamala Harris, we have a president of the United States who has chosen to use his words in a way that have been selling hate and division among us. Bernie Sanders, please stop the racist, anti-immigrant rhetoric. Stop the hatred in this country, which is creating the kind of violence that we see. Look, imagine for a moment, the thought experiment, imagine for a moment after a supporter of Bernie Sanders attempted to kill multiple members of the United States Congress, Republican members of their baseball team who were practicing for a baseball match against the Democrat members of the House. What if somebody had aimed those words at Bernie Sanders and held him to blame for the incident? This is not what our country needs at this moment.
In addition to that, Amy Klobuchar, another presidential candidate, also just tweeted out, and she took on the president's words from just a few moments ago: mental illness and hate pulls triggers, not the gun. She said that is a dodge by the president, and he is avoiding the truth of the matter. Obviously, they are calling on the president to act here in the form of changing gun laws in this country. The president said during that speech, I'm open to discussing all ideas that will work. He has proposed some things on Twitter. How far do you think the president is willing to go and to work with Congress to enact change?
Well, it sounds like he is, but let's talk about the kind of change that the Democrats want. Bernie Sanders insisted that the Senate come back and immediately pass two bills passed by the House that have to do with background checks. But as you heard earlier in the reporting, background checks there's nothing in either of these instances that would have stopped somebody from buying a gun. Now, we are also talking about an assault weapons ban, but that will still leave large numbers of so-called assault weapons, semi-automatic weapons out there. I mean, at the end, talk about dodging. Really, at the end of the day, my suspicion is that a lot of the Democrats running for president would like to follow the example of Australia, which, after having a series of mass murders, basically banned all weapons. And maybe that's where they want to go, but they're not willing to say that right now, because my feeling is this is more about politics than it is about getting, taking advantage of the moment is more what it's about. Let me talk about two other people, and I thought it was a contrast because both are Texans, but they both have a different approach to this. We had Robert Francis O'Rourke, who in this moment where we needed somebody to strike a moment of unity and eloquence, here's what he said. You know this, you know the blank he's been saying, referring to President Trump. He's been calling Mexicans immigrants rapists and criminals. I don't know, like members of the press, comma, what the blank. I mean, connect the dots about what he's doing in this country. He's not tolerating racism. He's promoting racism. If we ever needed any indication that this is somebody who is not worthy of the highest office in the land, there it is. By contrast, Julian Castro, I thought, hit it almost right. He said, he did criticize the president, saying the president ought to try and unite Americans instead of fanning the flames of bigotry. I thought the first part of that was good. He was aspirational. Here's what the president ought to be doing. But he said, I'm not going to hold the president responsible for the shooter. The shooter pulled the trigger. I thought that was a better way to approach this in a moment where the country doesn't need more hyperpartisanship. It needs a moment of unity.
Well, the president did tackle a number of issues, including racist hate, white supremacy, the internet, video games. He addressed all of that in that speech. 29 people killed, dozens more injured. Karl Rove, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Here is the mayor of Dayton, Nan Whaley, at the microphone. We've been waiting on this. We know the local police is there. So, too, is the FBI and a number of politicians, Sherrod Brown, Rob Portman, senators from Ohio. So we just, during the introductions here, also Congressman Michael Turner, who lives in downtown Dayton, Ohio, was there as well. The mayor was with Sandra about 2 hours ago, and there were precious few details that we have learned based on the interview that we had with her. So perhaps they're about to reveal a little more as we drop in out of this press conference in Dayton.
Last night, folks coming together in the Oregon District. The Oregon District is open. A lot of you who may not be from here will talk about how the Oregon District seems closed. Just a point of reference. It's a local-owned businesses, and so a lot of those local-owned businesses close regularly on Sunday and Monday. That is very typical for them. So if you're a regular in Dayton, you know which restaurants are open on Monday and which ones aren't. And the majority of them, that's their weekend. So I want you to make sure in your coverage. I've heard that a couple of times when folks have said, well, they say it's open, but it seems to be closed. It's because it's Sunday and Monday. I know some of the places are planning on opening just because of this on Monday, even though they're normally not open. But we are respecting what they have to do to go through as local businesses. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Beal next to just give an update. There's not much movement on the investigation this early, but wanted to see if he had give him some time for some comments this morning. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I do have just very brief update. I want to remind you that we are less than 36 hours into this incident and its investigation. I can confirm that if all the magazines that were recovered from the suspect were completely full, and we have not had a chance to examine that. We just know we have magazines with bullets in them, but if all of those were completely at full capacity, including the loose rounds found on the ground near him, as well as in a backpack that he carried, he would have had a maximum of 250 rounds in his possession at the time. We can confirm at least 41 spent shell casings from his weapon based on their location and his path of travel. That's at least 41. Because you can well understand, in a very dynamic and chaotic scene as this was, with people running through the crime scene, with first responders running through the crime scene, with emergency EMS traveling through the crime scene, evidence can be lost. So we can tell you at least 41 spent shell casings from the suspect. As it relates to the officers, we have recovered 45 caliber shell casings, 16.233 caliber shell casings, and 1 shotgun shell casing. In terms of the persons injured, we're getting different information from other sources of persons treated in the hospital. So we have previously said 27. There's some information as 32. I can confirm to you that there is at least 14 of those injured, whether that number is 27 or 32, at least that were injured through gunshot wounds. So many people were injured through other means in their flight from this very chaotic event. There are autopsies currently being completed by the coroner's office, so that is a process that is still undergoing, and it will be some time before the outcome of autopsies, and that's really all I have to share thus far this morning.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay.
Next, I'm going to invite Fire Chief Payne to come forward and speak a little bit about some of the first responders from the fire EMS response.
Good morning, everybody. So at 1:07, Dayton Fire Department received their first dispatch